Good morning. I am honored to introduce Jake Sullivan, Assistant to the President for National Security Affairs. I had the distinct privilege of serving on Mr. Sullivan's staff last year. His leadership and public service, rendered quietly and out of the public eye, was an example of the strength of our democratic institutions. He is the epitome of a foreign policy professional. Following his remarks, SCSP Senior Policy Advisor Seth Center will join him for a discussion. Please welcome Mr. Jake Sullivan.
Good morning. Good morning. Okay, all right, good. Thank you, Liza, very much for those kind words, and thanks to Illy and the entire team at SCSP, and I look forward to a brief conversation with Seth if I don't run out the clock with my remarks. So maybe I'll just stand up here and keep talking so I don't have to answer any hard questions. I also want to just say congratulations to the entire SCSP team on the release of the report. A little over a year ago, I actually had the opportunity at the National Security Commission on Artificial Intelligence's gathering to share a few thoughts on the digital revolution and what the implications were for U.S. national security and U.S. foreign policy. And I argued that after a first liberalizing wave of innovation in the early internet era, and then a wave of authoritarian counter-revolution in the 2000s when our competitors and adversaries took advantage of our complacency and inherent openness, we had to work on ushering in a new third wave of the digital revolution to ensure that emerging technologies work for, not against, our democracies and our security. I don't need to tell anybody in this room that advancements in science and technology are poised to define the geopolitical landscape of the 21st century. They will generate game changers in health and medicine, and food security, and clean energy and computing. We'll see leap-ahead breakthroughs and new industries that drive economic growth and new prosperity. And of course, we'll see new military and intelligence capabilities that will shape our national security. Preserving our edge in science and technology is not a domestic issue or a national security issue. It's both. And under President Biden's leadership across the entirety of our national security enterprise, we've built into the foundation of our approach a deep integration of domestic policy and foreign policy. And in the National Security Council that I lead, we have really tried to focus in on issues that spill out of these two traditional silos that cannot be naturally confined to one or the other. As part of that, the Biden administration has been pursuing a modern industrial and innovation strategy to invest in the sources of strength at home, which also power our strength around the world. We know that nothing is inevitable about maintaining America's core strength and competitive advantage in the world, and we know that it has to be renewed, revitalized, and stewarded, and that is especially true when it comes to U.S. technological leadership. In line with the vision I laid out at the National Commission last year, we see four pillars at the heart of our strategy. First, investing in our science and technology ecosystem. Second, nurturing top STEM talent here in the United States. Third, protecting our technology advantages. And fourth, deepening and integrating our alliances and partnerships. Fundamentally, we believe that a few select technologies are set to play an outsized role over the coming decade. Much like the Pareto principle, we can imagine that 80% of our overall success will turn on what we do in 20% of the technologies. And we believe that three families of technologies in particular will be central and critical to the coming decade. First, computing-related technologies, including microelectronics, quantum information systems, and artificial intelligence. Advancements in computing hardware, in algorithmic design, in large-scale data sets are leading to new discoveries in virtually every scientific field. They're the new sources of economic growth, and they're also driving advanced military modernization efforts for ourselves, for our allies, and for our competitors and adversaries. Second, biotechnologies and biomanufacturing. We can now read, write, and edit genetic code, which has rendered biology programmable. Together with advances in computing, we're poised for breakthroughs in everything from drug discovery to chemical and material manufacturing. And finally, clean energy technologies. The global transition to clean energy is not only necessary for the health of our planet, but it will also be a major source of economic and jobs growth over the coming decade and the decades beyond, and it will ensure long-term U.S. energy independence and the energy security of the United States and our allies. This is not to say that other technologies are inconsequential. Far from it. It's not to say that that 20% may not look different some years from now because of the speed and nature of change. It's just to say that these three areas that we want to focus in on, computing-related technologies, biotech, clean tech, are true force multipliers through the tech ecosystem, and leadership in each of these areas is a national security imperative. Lest you think, though, that we're just zeroing in on them and not paying attention to everything else, just this morning, the administration released important recommendations for actions to preserve U.S. leadership on digital assets. So our policy will cover the waterfront, even as we drive at the heart of what we see as being the most game-changing technological fields relevant to both our economic prosperity and our national security. So turning to these four pillars of our strategy, and starting with the first, recharging the engine of American technological dynamism and innovation, especially in these foundational sectors. The record over the course of the past 20 months is one of furious activity, I believe, leading to some incredibly powerful results that are transforming America's capacity to lead on science and technology. Over the last year, the Biden administration has made historic investments, and not just in basic research. We're investing in the industries of the future and strengthening the resilience and security of our supply chains. Over the past month alone, President Biden has signed the CHIPS and Science Act, has signed an executive order on advancing biotechnology and biomanufacturing innovation, and has signed the Inflation Reduction Act. The CHIPS Act invests $52 billion to restore U.S. leadership in semiconductor manufacturing and R&D that reduce our over-reliance on foreign-produced chips. It's actually an investment larger than the real cost of the Manhattan Project. And on top of this, that bill authorizes the largest single-year percentage increase in overall federal funding of basic scientific research in 70 years. Now we just need Congress to appropriate that funding. The executive order on biotech and biomanufacturing ensures that we will not only be poised to design the next generation of medicines, materials, and fuels here in the United States, but also make them here in the United States, from lab to fab. And the Inflation Reduction Act hardly needs me to elaborate on its impact. It is the single largest investment in climate and clean energy solutions in American history. With each of these investments, our goal is to crowd in private investment, not replace it, and to attract patient capital to bring critical technologies to scale, particularly for next-generation energy technologies like clean hydrogen and fusion. A proactive investment strategy now may save us billions of dollars later. We're also charting the way for large-scale technological infrastructure projects that will serve as national assets, like a potential national artificial intelligence research resource, which would make advanced AI and computing infrastructure available to any researcher in the United States. The second pillar of our strategy is developing, attracting, and retaining top talent, nurturing the technology ecosystem in the United States, both by growing more talent and by attracting more talent, and then doing all that we need to do to retain that talent through the years. The easiest way, of course, to achieve this goal, and not just the easiest, but a vital ingredient of achieving this goal, is to make sure that the United States remains the preferred destination for all premier STEM talent around the globe. That means investing in our domestic research and education pipelines, and it also means ensuring that top foreign talent can come to the United States and stay in the United States. China is doubling down on its STEM talent production and its STEM talent attraction. But attracting and retaining the world's best STEM talent is an advantage that is the United States' to lose, and we are determined not to lose it. We've made some important progress on this front. Early this year, we announced a series of measures to streamline the immigration process and open new pathways for international STEM students and researchers. We've also issued new guidance eliminating the need to have a sponsoring U.S. employer for highly accomplished individuals with an advanced degree in STEM, especially where it is critical to U.S. national security. Such individuals can now apply for a national interest waiver and self-petition for an EB-2 visa. That may sound technical, but the practical results of that are already bearing fruit and will be a powerful signal that the United States is open for business for the world's top STEM talent now and into the future. This is good, but we need to do more. And we're ready to work with industry and with Congress on a bipartisan basis to capitalize on what one of America's true superpowers is, the capacity to attract the best STEM talent from around the world. The third pillar is protecting our technology advantages and preventing our competitors from stealing America's intellectual property and using our technologies against us or our people or our allies. On export controls, we have to revisit the longstanding premise of maintaining relative advantages over competitors in certain key technologies. You see, we previously maintained a sliding scale approach that said we need to stay only a couple of generations ahead, but that is not the strategic environment we're in today. Given the foundational nature of certain technologies, such as advanced logic and memory chips, we have to maintain as large a lead as possible. Earlier this year, the United States and our allies and partners levied on Russia the most stringent technology restrictions ever imposed on a major economy. These measures have inflicted tremendous costs, forcing Russia to use chips from dishwashers in its military equipment. This has demonstrated that technology export controls can be more than just a preventative tool in crisis and in extremis. If implemented in narrow circumstances, when the certain bar is met in a way that is robust, durable, and comprehensive, they can be a new strategic asset in the U.S. and allied toolkit to impose costs on adversaries and even over time degrade their battlefield capabilities and their capacity to project power. The administration also has taken a series of steps to modernize our investment screening system. Just yesterday, President Biden issued an executive order providing the first formal presidential guidance on CFIUS in the history of the committee. The first formal presidential guidance on CFIUS in the history of the CFIUS committee. I was struck when I learned that that gap existed, and we as a National Security Council and as a government were determined to run a process to fill it, and yesterday that is what the president did. That order puts us back ahead of the game. It bolsters CFIUS's ability to defend against evolving risks, because the risks in this area are constantly changing as competitors adapt. By directing the committee to consider, in connection with countries of concern, a new set of specific risk factors, such as whether a transaction impacts U.S. leadership in technologies relevant to national security or presents risks to U.S. persons' data. And we'll continue to examine whether additional steps are necessary to best posture CFIUS to protect U.S. investors from predatory foreign investments. Looking forward, we're making progress in formulating an approach to address outbound investment in sensitive technologies, particularly investments that would not be captured by export controls and that could enhance the technological capabilities of our competitors in the most sensitive areas. And we're working closely with Congress to ensure that the CHIPS Act contains robust guardrails that prevent companies that receive taxpayer money from turning around and making investments in China that undermine our national security. In all cases, We fully intend for industry to have an opportunity to provide input at the right time, and we intend to proceed in ways that are clear for stakeholders and specifically tailored for our national security concerns, to focus with a scalpel on those things that are of most concern from the perspective of national security. Protecting our tech innovation from theft or abuse also requires strong cybersecurity protections. President Biden issued an executive order on improving the nation's cybersecurity last year, and subsequent directives have built on that. And through these efforts, we have taken a wide range of steps necessary to defend our nation from one of the most pressing threats to our economic and national security. Finally, we've instituted measures to ensure the intellectual property behind our most innovative technologies is protected. The U.S. Patent and Trademark Office now has a new pilot program that accelerates patent applications for innovations that reduce emissions, so these products can be deployed rapidly without risking their intellectual property. The fourth and final pillar is deepening our cooperation with allies and partners, which is perhaps the most core hallmark of the Biden administration's approach to foreign policy. From transforming the G7 into a sort of steering committee of the free world on issues like sanctions and energy security, to launching an innovative and far-reaching security partnership on advanced capabilities called AUKUS, we are deepening our unrivaled network of alliances and partnerships and driving a new strategic alignment and integration across the Atlantic and the Pacific. We created the US-EU Trade and Technology Council to help shape standards and rules of the road on emerging technology, including by working together effectively through the technical standards bodies that will set those rules of the roads in key areas that so many of you work in. We've established new initiatives on clean energy and on critical and emerging technologies within the Quad. In the G7, we've launched new efforts on cyber and quantum and are prepared to deploy tens of billions of dollars for tech infrastructure development globally through the Partnership for Global Infrastructure and Investment. Just last week, we hosted the first in-person ministerial meeting of the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework, which includes dedicated efforts on clean energy and digital cooperation. We've started new senior bilateral initiatives on technology cooperation with close partners like Israel and India, the ROK and Japan. We announced technology initiatives at the Summit for Democracy, which included efforts to align international export control regulations with human rights objectives and to promote democracy-affirming and privacy-enhancing technologies. And we've scaled up our efforts with allies and partners, including through NATO, to share actionable cyber threat information and to hold bad cyber actors accountable for their malicious conduct. One area where working with allies and partners has been particularly relevant and useful has been in the area of 5G. We have worked with allies and partners through the US-EU Trade and Technology Council, through the Quad, through bilateral partnerships, and now through the Partnership on Global Investment and Infrastructure to try to help develop and deploy new Open RAN technology that is credible, scalable, sustainable, and can provide an alternative to the existing technologies in the 5G space that alternative fundamentally plays to the technology advantages of the United States and our allies and partners. These are all points on the board. And individually taken, you could just sort of plot them. You got US-EU Trade and Technology Council, you've got the Quad, you've got AUKUS, you've got the G7. But the other thing that we've been doing over the course of the past 20 months is connecting the dots, linking all of our efforts with like-minded democracies, like-minded economies into an integrated strategy built on the premise that we are stronger when we leverage the capabilities and common purpose of friends and allies. And almost 2 years into the Biden administration, having integrated and linked these efforts, we believe that we have reinforced the fundamental foundation upon which American power, influence, and technological leadership sit. Last year, I noted the enormity of the task we faced in redesigning the field on which future technology competition would play out. And we're facing a competitor that is determined to overtake US technology leadership and willing to devote nearly limitless resources to do so. But the last 20 months, indeed, just the last several weeks, indeed, just the last several days, this week alone, we've done the biotech EO, the CFIUS EO, the digital assets EO, and the president has welcomed members of Congress to the White House for the celebration of the Inflation Reduction Act. We have shown how powerfully and effectively we can lead when we simply put our nose to the grindstone and try to get things done. We're making historically unprecedented investments, putting us back on track to lead the industries of the future. We're doubling down on our efforts to be a magnet for the world's top technical talent. We've adapted our technology protection tools to new geopolitical realities, and most importantly, we've done this in a way that is inclusive, force multiplying, and consistent with our values. At home, many of our efforts, indeed I would say most of our efforts in this area, have been bipartisan. And overseas, all of them have been in lockstep with our allies and partners. The work ahead of us remains significant, and we never sleep, as you may be able to tell. But taking stock of where we are today, I believe it is fair to say that America is rising to the moment. And that is not just about what the administration's doing. It's about what the Congress is contributing through historic legislation. It is about what the private sector and the academy and so many other stakeholders across the United States are doing to help build an ecosystem that fueled America's rise to the top of the heap in terms of technological competition and leadership, and that will keep us there in a proud, fierce, forward-looking way that is always keeping eyes on the future and always trying to do this in an affirmative method, not a defensive method. And that is what has made me among the most proud. This is among the most proud things that I feel like I've been engaged in as National Security Advisor over the course of the past 20 months. And many people in this room, I want to pay a debt of gratitude to, because this would not be possible without that kind of whole of society approach. So I thank you for everything you've done. I thank you for listening to me today, and we have a lot of work still left to do, so we can't by any means rest on our laurels. Thank you very much.
Well, as a good Yale-trained attorney, you've left me very little time for cross-examination. And given the success of you and your NatSec Tech teams led by Tarun, you've left me very little space to cross-examine you. So what I thought I'd do is build on a theme that the president has developed quite a bit, and you've talked about eloquently, which is the contest between autocracy and democracy. Last year when you spoke to the AI Commission, you talked about the fact that it was much harder to maintain neutrality than in the past, and it was going to get harder to in that contest. So I was wondering what progress you've seen, particularly from the private sector and academia, as they've thought about that contest between autocracy and democracy, and what you might want from them in the future, particularly in the tech competition.
Well, I would sort of make two sets of observations in answer to that question. The first relates to a significant crisis. That's the not sleeping. A significant crisis besetting the world today, which is the war in Ukraine. And in the days that followed Russia's brutal invasion of Ukraine, the United States, along with our European allies and partners in Asia, imposed a very far-reaching set of sanctions and export controls that are continuing to bite and squeeze the Russian economy. But something else happened too, which is without any policy imposition or any direction from the government, hundreds, now well more than 1,000 companies simply made the decision to pull out of Russia, that they would no longer continue operations in a country that had so brazenly and brutally violated the fundamental norms of the international order. And I think that was an indication that for the American private sector, the European private sector, values matter, people matter, and that the American business community was going to stand up and be counted. And I think that's also a lesson to would-be future aggressors, should they choose to do something so brazen and brutal and far-reaching. They would suffer consequences not just by dint of US policy, but consumers vote with their feet and business leaders vote with their conscience, as well as, obviously fulfilling their responsibilities to their company and to their employees. So that's just one very, I think, important episode from this year alone. That was in response to something. At the same time, I think the American private sector and stakeholders outside of government have been unbelievably central to helping build the kind of far-reaching investment agenda that I just laid out in my remarks today, and to which I referred at the end. If you think about the CHIPS and Science Act, or the Inflation Reduction Act, or many of the executive orders and actions that the administration has taken, those would not have happened without the advocacy, intellectual contribution and shaping, and coalition building of the private sector and the academy and advocates and other stakeholders, who basically said, we do need to get back in the game of making the kinds of investments that have kept the United States on the leading edge of innovation. And we need to do so for economic reasons, for the welfare of our people. We need to do so for national security reasons. And we need to do so because, and this gets to the third wave point, and which I think is kind of implicit in a lot of the work we're all doing, we want emerging technologies to work for rather than against our vision of what a good and just world looks like. And that requires us to be in that leadership position to help be able to shape the global technology ecosystem. And so, both in response to the actions of competitors and adversaries and in playing a dynamic form of offense on the technologies of the future, I think what we have seen is not so much kind of a choosing sides theory as a choosing a certain vision of the world that we all care about and want to defend and protect, and that has made, I think, the partnership between government in these areas and those outside of government that much more effective.
And following on this thread, it's been a long year and a half since the interim strategic guidance came out that you came in with. How has your own thinking about the role of America in the world, our broader strategic conception, changed or not over the course of the past 18 months?
I wouldn't say that any particular dynamic has fundamentally been paradigm altering for me, but it's the colors are brighter and the font is bigger on all the things I thought when we came in. It's whatever I thought and more so. And that's true with respect to geopolitical competition. When we came into office, I knew we were facing stiff challenges from autocratic competitors in Russia and China, but even more so with what Russia is doing to try to shatter the basic norms of the international system, and China on multiple dimensions moving out to advance its own vision and its own interests in the world. And then on the other side of the ledger, the need for the United States to play a central role in galvanizing cooperation in rallying countries to solve the great transnational challenges of our time, including climate change, pandemic disease, nuclear proliferation, and to protect against fundamental economic instability. The need for that cooperation has only become more acute as we see the acceleration of those various trends in problematic directions. One thing that has been particularly interesting to me, though, over the last 20 months is we've gone through periods in our history where the dominant theme has been geopolitical competition, and where the dominant theme has been, more of the transnational, where the great powers were more quiescent. In the last 20 years, it was much more about terrorism and other kind of international, transnational challenges, and much less about geopolitical competition. Now obviously during the Cold War, it was foursquare about geopolitical competition, and transnational challenges didn't matter that much. A national security strategy today must drive forward on both of these fundamental objectives simultaneously, and the challenge is that one makes the other somewhat harder, because we need to work with every country in the world on climate change. And we need to work with every country in the world on pandemic disease. And yet, the level of trust and the modes of cooperation are not there, and countries also seek advantage in ways that are deleterious to the effort to solve the transnational problems that we're dealing with. And just one example of that recently that brought this home to me in very stark terms, following the activity in the Taiwan Strait in August, the People's Republic of China came out with an announcement that said, "We are hereby suspending all cooperation with the United States on climate change." Well, that to me is like one of the biggest non sequiturs out there, because from our perspective, we can compete vigorously and still fulfill our responsibilities as a major emitter and a great power that has to work on this issue with everyone, including China. The fact that Beijing took that step, that they linked these two issues, is worrying. We can handle it, the US can handle it, but it should be worrying for the rest of the world, because it is punishing the rest of the world in doing that. And so that particular dynamic, the linkage between these two issues, geopolitical competition on the one hand and the core need to deal with transnational challenges on the other, that's something that as strategic thinkers and actors in the US government, we really need to figure out the most effective way forward on.
So I think you've given us a good intellectual agenda to work for. You've got a community of bipartisan national security professionals who are passionate about technology. What more would you like from them over the next year or two or three?
So I think first, we've got a great base to build on, because I think we have extended and deepened habits of dialogue and cooperation that have produced real results. And so there are two or three things now that we've got to do, certainly in the remaining time I have, however long that is. The first is we've now passed these major pieces of legislation, mobilizing huge resources, and now we got to implement in a way that really works and proves it out. And that means the US government's got to get implementation right, but it also means we all need to work together extremely effectively on being relentlessly focused on implementation, especially with the CHIPS and Science Act and the Inflation Reduction Act. So that's one. The second is that we are still working through how exactly we want to shape and execute against certain of the protect side of the agenda. So what should an outbound investment set of protocols look like? What should a sharpened set of export controls for high-end national security technologies look like? We need input and guidance on this as we proceed, and I mentioned in my speech that we will not do anything that doesn't involve a transparent, forthcoming dialogue with the private sector, because you all are in the front lines. And then finally, I mentioned what I thought was most important, these three foundational areas of technology, and rooted in the Pareto principle. But what we also need from the private sector is to tell us, hey, you guys are missing things we're seeing, and you're behind the curve, and here's how we can help you get ahead of the curve. And having those on the front lines of technological innovation and commercial enterprise coming to us as an early warning system to say, don't fall asleep at the switch on the next thing coming, that would be enormously valuable to us. And so our door is always open. Tarun Chabra, who's our Senior Director for Technology and National Security at the National Security Council, and is here with me today, has helped drive a lot of this work and wants to be a fantastic partner. Ann Neuberger, who's our Deputy National Security Advisor for Cyber and Emerging Technologies, similarly has built a real muscle memory around engagement. I personally the president, Brian Deese, our Office of Science and Technology Policy, we really want to lean forward in saying we're looking for partnership, we're looking for the opportunity to work together, and we're looking to be told where we're wrong, where we're blind, where we're behind the curve, because that will help us see, get right, and get back ahead of the curve. And so that would be my plea to all of you today, and I thank you for the time that you've given me.
Thank you, Jake. Appreciate it.